first off, I would love to say that Mr. Macdonald is a genuinely lovely guy, and if more feminists acted like he did, then feminism as a whole would be way more respected.
It's a good thing. Now, I know this doesn't get said a lot, but it's quite clear to me that there's a anti-feminist vibe on YouTube.
Mr. Macdonald, people don't hate feminism specifically. What they hate is people who don't do much research into their topics. For example, the wage gap, which has been highly discredited over the years by various scientific resources and so many studies, and the plain logic of companies not hiring women as much. And there are many reasons for the pay gap, let's just say, but the point is that I'm trying to make, people don't necessarily hate feminism. Feminism does do a lot of good, and people do advocate for feminists. It's just that people don't like to have their rights taken away from them by feminists that go a little too crazy with them. For example, take the recent birthing person scandal from the United Kingdom, where the term mother was considered offensive because of, I believe it was one guy out of 700,000 people who had a child. And that kind of thing is what's being fought against, not the idea that men and women should be equal.
And that really has to change, I feel, because feminism is fundamentally a good thing. If you look at the world and the way it is, there's clearly a gender gap and inequality between the two sexes.
I do agree that in many countries there is an inequality between men and women. However, these countries are more countries in the Middle East and places under Muslim rule, and also Asia. It's not... Modern Western countries don't really have that much of a gender discrimination sort of thing. It is mostly countries like the countries in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, that don't have all the same rights for women as they do for men, because it's their culture, and feminism and what we want to see out of feminism isn't for feminism to go away, because feminism is indeed a good thing. However, we want feminism to not target just modern Western countries as much, because modern Western countries are the most socially tolerant countries on the earth. And if you went out to these to these countries, then you could do a lot of you could do a lot of good for a lot of people. And I get that not every one of you can go out to China and India and all that and preach feminism, but you can do a lot better than just sitting in your... And obviously this is a generalization. I'm not saying that everyone is like this, but in general, feminist YouTubers are just sitting around in their chairs and talking about the modern United States and Europe, I suppose, as this hellhole of civil rights, when that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, there's more civil rights, there's more, there are more things, more opportunities available to women and minorities, because they are women and minorities, than straight white men. Like, women get shelters, like abuse shelters. There's gender transitioning therapies already available. There's homeless shelters are way more likely to take in women and children than men, even though men are the ones who fought in the Vietnam War. And so, and these men are the most homeless people in the United States, these Vietnam War veterans. And it's not that, and so it's, hold on, it's not like it's really correct to say that there is a gender gap. Well, it is correct, but it's not really, it's misleading is what it is, because it makes people think that there is an inequality in men and women in the United States. And I'm just talking on like a judicial, fundamental, societal level. Obviously there are sexist people and racist people, and that is bad, but I can't say that I would want to get rid of them, because one of my personal greatest desires is as much personal autonomy and self-rights as you can. And I don't think you should be allowed to criminalize thought, because, well, if you criminalize thought, then movements like yours couldn't exist, and just so many bad things. Criminalizing thought is what makes North Korea, and I don't think that's a good thing. So you're allowed to think whatever you want to think, whether it's racist or like overly sensitive to the point of being racist.
And I feel as though it's not really given fair representation in the media today. You see a lot of YouTubers finding exploitative clips of feminists who fit an agenda they can easily push. So, for instance, you see a lot of women who are either overweight or loud or disabled portrayed as the average feminist, and then used as a straw man to denigrate the rest of the argument. And
the thing about YouTubers finding feminists that fit an agenda, as you say, is that these are the people who rally against the rights of individuals. It's not because they're easy. It's not because they're an easy target. It's because they're the targets that are most threatening to personal rights. And feminists that don't necessarily fit that idea, like, say, your Rosa Parks and your Kamisa Mohammed Sawadis, they're not as attacked because they actually did things for women's rights. But the modern feminists who are attacked, they're attacked because they actively try to take away rights from citizens, and those of us who attacked these people are attacking them because, or at least for me, like, my greatest, as I've said before in this video, my greatest desire is for the United States to be like what it was founded for, which is the freedom to do whatever, and like not be prosecuted for it for whatever reason. Like, once you start taking away rights, you become the monster, essentially.
I feel as though that's quite unfair, because not only does this imply that these women are somehow lesser and somehow able to be mocked, but also it doesn't give a fair representation of what feminist ideals stand for.
Feminist ideals are perfectly honorable, but the people who, but as I said before, we pick on, or at least I plan to pick on the people who actively go against the United States constitutional rights. And it's not that we're against feminism. It's that we're against totalitarianism. That's all. It's not that we need an easy target or anything. It's that there is a threat, and we're trying to create a future where we don't have to be worried that we're going to be sent to prison for accidentally calling somebody the wrong pronoun, because I know that that's somewhat of a slippery slope, but in Canada there was a law passed that made it punishable to call somebody by their to not call somebody by their preferred pronoun. And that's once that starts happening, then that just opens the floodgates for new possibilities. And I know that I don't know what's going to happen next, but I generally know people, and people aren't a kind species. And once they start thinking about themselves, they really start thinking about themselves.
And what feminism really is aiming to do. So, for instance, we can look at the situation of many women across the West as not what gender equality would represent. So you only have to look at the differences between women's health, women's representation, women's pay, women's status, sexual health, equality in representation.
About media representation, there are several media publications and television channels that cater specifically to women and the LGBT community, and these channels and publications, there aren't really as many for men. The only men's only publication I can think of, or the only men's only. Okay, let's start with television channels. The only television channel I can think of specifically specifically advertised and marketed towards men is Spike TV. Of course, I'm sure that there are a couple more, but that's the only one that I can think of that is specifically targeting men. And for publications, pretty much the same thing, except it's with things like, say, Playboy magazine and publications of that nature. And I'm not talking about pornography, because Playboy magazine isn't necessarily pornography, and in fact they've stopped doing that now that the internet's cutting into that venue. So they're basically a men's version of Cosmopolitan magazine. And on the women's side, you get the aforementioned Cosmopolitan, Mrs., My Weekly, Bella, Good Housekeeping, and Parenting. And for television channels, you get Lifestyle, I apologize, I mean Lifetime, WTV, or rather W Network. I apologize again. Centric TV, self-branded as the first network designed for black women. We're starting to see ABC get into it with their When We Rise series, and so on. So there's representation, and there's more representation than you think. There is. I apologize. Women's health is different from men's health and costs more because women and men's bodies aren't inherently equal. Women's bodies have far more delicate parts because they weren't designed to be... Because they were designed... And I know this sounds sexist, but they were designed to stay home, gather berries if they wanted to, and take care of the children. Men were biologically made to protect women, in in order to keep the tribe safe, and men were also the hunters, so it would make sense that women would be frailer because they didn't need to go out as much, because men did that for them. So that's the reason that men are stronger and women are weaker, and men tend to be healthier in most areas except for except for the heart areas. Other than that, women's healthcare costs more because there's a lot more involved in the process than men's healthcare, which is typically more of a get it done with the cheapest possible measure. As for women's representation, I think you've heard my previous comments, and for representation in the workforce, not only are half of all workers women, but, for example, in police work, the first policewoman was Alice Wells from Los Angeles, who joined the police force in 1910 and was promoted as a sergeant in 1934. And this is just talking about America, by the way. I don't know if there was an earlier policewoman, but Alice Wells was the first American policewoman. As for pay, the pay gap, as I'm sure you've heard before, doesn't account for any variables, and is comparing female elementary school workers and social workers to male oil rig constructors and neurosurgeons. The pay gap doesn't completely disappear when you control for all these factors, but you can control for one more factor, which is that women don't like to negotiate. They do like to ask more, though, and when you tell women that they can ask for more money rather than negotiate, they tend to ask 4% more than men for more money. On average, 4% more, that I should be saying.
And you see the inequalities that lie across the world. And it's easy to pull up one or two stats and disprove this, but often there's more to inequality than just statistics.
Yes, these inequalities do happen across the world. However, they don't happen, for the most part, I should say, in modern Western countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, and Germany. Because these countries have made it illegal for quite some time now for official, say, company or state discrimination against women. And it may even still happen in some companies. However, these are in cities where this sort of thing is the norm. Like, I think a lot of cities in the southern United States, which do still remain a little bit of that Confederate mentality. However, the northern United States, northern and western United States are very left-leaning right now, and same for the United Kingdom and Germany. Germany has a liberal leader. I know that the United States and United Kingdom both have conservatives, but conservative leaders don't necessarily represent the entirety of the government and people. They only represent what the head of the government is doing. And even then, Donald Trump and Theresa May aren't doing very much at all to take away people's rights. And before that, were both liberals, I believe. Well, what's his name? David Cameron was... I think David Cameron was technically a conservative, but he had mostly liberal thoughts, if I remember correctly. And while statistics may not be completely accurate, statistics are the only way that we can even have any semblance of knowing what is happening in our countries, because statistics are an average of everything that happens in a specific group.
You only have to observe how men and women are treated differently in different roles, and how seriousness is not to scale with the treatment of men and women.
Yes, women do still get harassed in the workplace, and that is bad. However, that's not necessarily a governmental problem. That's more a problem of people, and these are often reported and taken to courts, and a lot of times justice is served. So it's really a case of bad people as opposed to a bad government or a bad society. In fact, society really hates people who sexually harass. They're like, oh, I know that rapists are the most hated people in prison. Sexual harassers are the most hated people out of prison.
So you realise that there's a gender problem, but there are still problems that exclusively focus on women in the workplace and in the Western world. And it's important to have feminism in the West, not only to push ourselves towards true gender equality, but also to set an example and a precedent for the rest of the world.
A good way to set a precedent in the rest of the world is by going to these countries and trying to preach to these countries your side of the argument. And I know that it might be impossible for some of you, but not all of you, because some of you feminists do have the money necessary to go over to Saudi Arabia or go over to China and have protection and speak to these people and enact some real change in these countries. You don't need to have the laws changed in the United States and the United Kingdom and these Western countries to set a precedent for the rest of the world, because I don't know if you know this, but the rest of the world doesn't exactly like us modern Western countries. In fact, the whole reason the war in the Middle East is going on right now is because I believe it was Syria doesn't particularly like this newfangled Christianity idea. Well, I should say ISIS, who is essentially just what you get when you turn Islam up to 10.5. That's what, and like ISIS isn't even an anomaly though, because these beliefs are already set in Islam and can be easily interpreted to mean that any other religion is bad, just like how in Christianity any other religion is bad and should be fought. And so naturally you're going to have people in these countries that haven't already changed not going to change their opinions because of the United States, the United Kingdom, and Germany doing these things, because, well, it's against their religion. And it would sort of be like if imagining Jews not eating who normally don't eat pork, I believe it was, starting to eat like baby back ribs because their Christian neighbor started eating baby back ribs. It's not going to happen because the culture is just so different, and these ideas just don't translate. And in fact, these people find these ideas abhorrent. If you would have, because these traditions don't just date back to 2014 or whatever. These traditions date back hundreds of years. It's just ingrained in the religion. Or, sorry, I should say, it's ingrained in the culture, because China has these problems too. And China is, I believe, mostly Christian, actually.
Because whilst there are problems with focusing on the West as the centre of the world, how can we expect things to progress in the Middle East or in other parts of the world that haven't quite reached the same levels of liberty and equality we had in the West, when we ourselves claim equality has been achieved and stop pushing for greater equality between men and women?
Because the idea of men and women not being equal is, well, men and women gained, okay, there are still 1 or 2 rights that women don't have in America. However, there are also 1 or 2 rights that men don't have that women have in America. It all depends on the biology of men and women, because men and women are inherently different creatures. And even then, I believe all I believe all gendered words have been stripped from the laws in the United States this decade. And I'm not sure about the United Kingdom and Germany, but in the United States, I believe the law has been stripped of all gendered terms, so it replaces men and women with persons, you know? And I don't really see how you can get much more equal than that, and refusing to hire somebody based on their race or gender has been illegal since the 60s, so there really isn't too much more that women can ask for that men have and women don't. Because, in fact, women do get a lot of preferential treatment. But like, sure, in like the South, deep South and stuff like that, that still is a problem, but these are people who do think it's 1868 still. So it's not a nationwide problem. It's mostly associated with the most religious parts of the United States and other countries like that, and it's a huge problem in the mostly religious countries in the Middle East.
How is that going to help feminists in Saudi Arabia or feminists in Africa, for instance, or regions of Africa?
It's going to help feminists in Saudi Arabia and Africa because it provides an example of feminism working and getting the results they want, and it shows that if we can do it here in the West, then they can do it there, and they can achieve what they want. And taking away that essentially means saying to feminists outside of our countries that feminism doesn't work, and we've been trying it for 100 or so years, and we aren't getting any progress done. And if you send that signal off to these countries, then they're going to stop trying to get real equality done, and they're going to start trying to get our modern call me by Zur or go to prison this modern view of feminism, and they're going to adopt that because it seems to be working over here, and then they're just going to be killed because the culture doesn't like that sort of thing. So if we can provide an example of feminism actually working, that can, I guess, empower these people to go out and actually try to get these problems resolved in their countries, because we can be seen as sort of a model for how feminism should work. Hearing feminism doesn't work in the United States and the United Kingdom and such places, just in the Western world, which is supposed to be the safe haven of liberty. Hearing feminism doesn't work there may also incentivize feminists in third world countries that don't have the luxury of like having tolerant laws like we do.
And not to say that it's not needed here, but where inequality is easier to hone in on, we lose their strive, and it makes it easier for people devaluing equality in those regions to push down the need for feminism. To write it off completely, anywhere in the world, is counterproductive, because
assuming that men and women are already equal isn't necessarily a sexist idea. In fact, assuming that men and women are equal is possibly the most pro-feminist thing you can do, because the idea of feminism is that men and women are indeed equal. So why not treat women as your equals instead of this one oppressed group that needs to be saved, that needs needs to be saved by white men like me, or else they won't get anything done. Why would you? It essentially tells women, this rhetoric essentially tells women that they can't succeed in these countries, when it's so obviously wrong, when women are famous CEOs and the leaders of these countries. Yeah, like Angela Merkel could not have possibly gotten to where she is now if the West wasn't tolerant to women, and Barack Obama couldn't have gotten to where he was last year if the West wasn't tolerant to blacks. And I know that I just mentioned black people in a video pretty much solely about men and women, but feminism has absorbed the racial equality movement as well, so I figured I'd mention it. But like, you would not be able to have women even thinking about running for the presidency of the United States if the United States people were sexist, and especially not in 1872 with the story of Victoria Woodhull, who ran for the presidency before women were even allowed to vote. And back then, like, women didn't have all the rights that they do now, and even back then, Victoria Woodhull was allowed to run for the United States presidency, and that would not have happened if the United States was a sexist country. That just would not have happened. The only people who can be sexist are the people themselves, not the country, not the society, just the people living in them.
As you essentially stop the pushing force for equality and allow genuine sexists to be normalised by assuming their ideas and beliefs are correct. But even beyond that, feminism isn't about hating men. I mean, I'm a man myself, and to imply that I hate myself would be silly.
No, feminism shouldn't be about hating men. However, when you keep... and I'm not saying you, because obviously you are a better feminist than most people, but when the feminist movement can make things like kill all men and male tears trending on Twitter, then you know that there is a significant proportion of at least online feminists who are the most visible to the general public, speaking hatred towards men. And this, and like, a movement is only the sum of its parts, and when you have things like that in your movement, then that speaks volumes about the people in it. And feminism I know that feminism isn't necessarily about hating men. However, it's such a common occurrence that it's such a common occurrence that it's sort of become ingrained into the mentality and of both sides of what feminism is. And obviously not all feminists and not all anti-feminists, but it's just associated because it's sort of like I would liken it to the idea of children enjoying just popular music and not whatever music came in the past, because even though there is a large percentage of people of children who do listen to popular music of the past couple decades, there are a lot more children who listen to the popular music of this century.
On the grounds of feminism. But certainly it advocates for women to be given the same status and rights as men.
For most of the Western world, men and women are generally seen as equals. The only places in the Western world where men and women are not seen as equals yet are in very, very radically leftist groups and very, very, very conservative places like the Bible Belt and places like Malta and Austria, where these countries are very conservative. For example, in Malta, you can't even divorce, and these are really the only place where people really pay attention to somebody's gender anymore. I know that I certainly don't, but hey, that's just me. And personally, if you do find somebody in the West who is like who you believe is wrong, then try to engage in a conversation with them and try to see if you can get them to see your point. And
it's easy to point at laws like the Equal Pay Act or representation laws and say, oh, well, we got those laws, but it's equal now. But that's naive and it ignores history. I mean,
you can't claim history as grounds for modern racism or sexism, and politicians are only one possible candidate, and a lot of the time the racist or sexist politician isn't the one who gets picked. I mean, there are often racist or sexist politicians in office, but at the same time, not only do these racist or sexist laws usually get modified on the floor, I suppose, when they're pitched, but at the same time, they are also unable to take away rights at the federal level, which the Equal Pay Act of 1964 is at. The Equal Pay Act of 1964 is a law at the federal level which states cannot take away. They can only enforce it harshly or enforce it mildly. However, they cannot not enforce it at all. It is a federal crime, and if a vendor or a company is found to not be paying their workers equally, then they will have an investigation put into them, and the United States government will spend resources into making sure that that doesn't happen, because these politicians, while they may have these views, they don't necessarily have the power to take away these rights. And in fact, if a politician were ever to suggest repealing the Equal Pay Act of 1964, for instance, then most likely the people on the Board of Representatives and the House of Congress would not allow such a thing to happen, because it was just it made sense, and most people agree on the Equal Pay Act being a good bill, whether they be conservative or liberal.
You look at anti-racism laws, anti-homophobia laws. They didn't just eradicate these discriminations when they were established. I mean, quite clearly, you only have to look at various politicians across the West to see that clearly racism and homophobia are still issues. So the same applies to sexism, in that there is still sexist beliefs in society which we need to overcome. And in many cases, they're upheld by people who are claiming that sexism is over. I mean, again, you only have to look at the dismissive attitude that people have towards concepts like rape culture and the patriarchy. Two concepts that have been explained numerous times, and very well by various academic feminists, but which get ridiculed as these insane concepts. So, for instance, people hear rape culture and they think of trucks driving around, pulling women off the streets and gangbanging them in the alleyways, when in reality it's more to do with the way we view and discuss rape in society.
If rape culture was real, then why are rapists held in separate prisons? Because normal prisoners absolutely despise, would kill if they saw and knew actual rapists, or even just sentenced rapists, whether or not they actually raped anybody. They have to be kept in separate prisons because the lowest of the low, who are the people in prisons, hate their guts. How is that indicative of a rape culture where even criminals would kill you if they knew that you were a rapist? I don't see it at all. And in a supposedly patriarchal society where everything is designed to keep women down and have men rise on top, then why is it that women are indeed the more privileged of the two genders? This is easily proven with 3 tiers. The educational tier, which is that women are more likely to stay in school, get higher education and more funding, and are actually now being and now schools are selecting women for affirmative action and various things like this, where women are given preferential treatment. The second tier is the political tier. Women make up more of the population than men, and do actually vote more than men. And so women do have more power to make laws come true or not come true, because they do vote more than men, and there are more women than men in these cultures. And so even if the candidates selected don't show that, there are these women that vote for these candidates that aren't necessarily going to be female. They're just going to be the best people these women feel like are for the job. And so women are able to get their candidates selected more because women make up 50.9% of the United States population. And I'm just going by United States for these figures, by the way, because going through the most major Western countries would take far too long. So this is just going through the United States. And the third tier is economy. Despite making less than half of the GDP, most of it, and quite a lot of large companies, like for example YouTube itself, are controlled by women, and so they do make quite a lot of money, and so are very influential people, and this is 50.9% of the population. So women would also be the people with more money. So women do have more money than men because there are more women. And even in the social sphere, women are often seen as the victims in any conflicts, and are given preferential treatments on pretty much any service, and meanwhile men are pretty much just told to fuck off. If a woman claims that a man has raped her, then it's very likely that that man will go to prison, even if the rape claim was false, or even if that man never even lived in the United States until now. The problem with this is that there are so many more cases of not only women being able to imprison whoever they want to because they claim they raped them, but also men being essentially laughed out of a courthouse or a television show or whatever, or even just their friends' houses, because they claimed that they were raped by a woman. And essentially, men are the ones who are trivialized in rape cases. Women being raped, whether or not it actually even happened, is taken so seriously in this society that you're immediately told to fuck off if you even mention joking about rape. And but with a men's rape, that's allowed on television that's allowed as a joke on television for 7-year-olds, and that's not acceptable.
And it's easy to say that, oh, well, it's abhorrent and I wouldn't rape anyone. But then you look at the way it's discussed, and you look at how arguments around rape are presented, and you look at the victim blaming and often inadvertent societal pressures on women who face these sort of things, and sexual assault and sexual harassment. And you have to really consider that rape culture is a thing. I mean, just the other week on Sky News, we saw a presenter and his co-presenter arguing that women who dress inappropriately, or in other words, show some more skin, leave themselves open to rape more. And that's a disgusting view, and that's one I would hope most decent people would see as inappropriate and clearly not right. But the fact that they can argue this on a mainstream media source shows that there's still progress to be made.
And most decent people actually do see that as horrible and not right. It's essentially it's essentially the same. Most people view that the same as what's his name, Alex Jones, or more accurately, that guest he had that one time. Can't remember his name right now, but he was some big CIA member from the 70s during the Nixon what was the Nixon administration, who does use the word Negro, and Negro isn't as bad as the other N-word used to describe blacks, which I don't even like to say, because that word was, the word Negro was used by black people in the age of the what was it, in the civil rights movement. But I've gotten off topic. I mean, the point is that even that's not seen as horrible by the general populace as that Sky TV presenter. But at the same time, these people not only market themselves to a specific demographic, but also are entitled to having their own opinions, because if they don't, then that's essentially what everyone, including you guys, are fighting against, which is the censorship of specific, which is a liberty that we cannot afford to lose.
And as for patriarchy, again, it's easy for people to conceive it as this, a table of men in hoods pointing at women and saying, oh, we need to shut them down. But again, that's not what people who argue for patriarchy, argue that patriarchy exists, are saying. You only have to look at the structure of any organisation, really.
And in a supposedly patriarchal society where everything is designed to keep women down and have men rise on top, then why is it that women are indeed the more privileged of the two genders? This is easily proven with 3 tiers. The educational tier, which is that women are more likely to stay in school, get higher education and more funding, and are actually now being and now schools are selecting women for affirmative action and various things like this, where women are given preferential treatment. The second tier is the political tier. Women make up more of the population than men, and do actually vote more than men. And so women do have more power to make laws come true or not come true, because they do vote more than men, and there are more women than men in these cultures. And so even if the candidates selected don't show that, there are these women that vote for these candidates that aren't necessarily going to be female. They're just going to be the best people these women feel like are for the job. And so women are able to get their candidates selected more, because women make up 50.9% of the United States population. And I'm just going by United States for these figures, by the way, because going through the most major Western countries would take far too long. So this is just going through the United States. And the third tier is economy. Despite making less than half of the GDP, most of it, and quite a lot of large companies, like for example YouTube itself, are controlled by women, and so they do make quite a lot of money, and so are very influential people. And this is 50.9% of the population, so women would also be the people with more money. So women do have more money than men, because there are more women. And even in the social sphere, women are often seen as the victims in any conflicts, and are given preferential treatments on pretty much any service. And meanwhile, men are pretty much just told to fuck off. If a woman claims that a man has raped her, then it's very likely that that man will go to prison, even if the rape claim was false, or even if that man never even lived in the United States until now.
In the West, to see that women are not normally going to reach the top, or certainly less in proportion to their male counterparts. Look at with world leaders, for instance. When a woman is a world leader, it's a big thing still, because you haven't achieved that equality where a woman and a man have the same level of chance to get to the top.
Well, a woman as a world leader is less a thing about that, and more a thing about we haven't really voted many in yet, because many women haven't been trying to get in, is the problem. Refer to my earlier comment about Victoria Woodhull, and you'll see that women have had the chance to get to the top since the 19th century at least. It's just that they haven't necessarily gotten there because there are either more popular presidential candidates, like Victoria Woodhull wasn't in the two major parties, or their male counterparts did have a more practical ideas, because there is a reason that candidates aren't selected, and that reason isn't just if they're a man or a woman. It's also based on these people looking at their policies, and if these people don't like these politicians' policies, they won't vote for them, and a lot of the time, and like that's why Hillary Clinton lost, because she wanted a war with Russia, and while that would make a couple people's wallets very happy, a war with Russia would be horrible for the rest of us, and so most people didn't want Hillary Clinton as the president, because that's what she would actually try to be doing, is initiating a war with Russia.
So, like, leaders like Angela Merkel, Theresa May, Thatcher, and I suppose Hillary Clinton, had she become president, would have stuck in mind, because these women have like gone against the norms in society and made it to the top of their field. We still see under the system a disproportionate amount of women who are at the senior boards and senior parliamentary boards and Congress and whatever. It's harder for them to reach the top.
There aren't as many female, say, congresswomen and people on the board of executives and things like that going for the top, because a lot of the times these people could easily run for the position or could be voted in, but they don't want these positions because being say, the president of the United States is a very, very taxing job, and some of these people just don't want to go up any higher because they're comfortable with where they're at, and I don't see why that shouldn't be allowed.
As signified by any statistic about representation in any real organisation, like the fact that such a minuscule number of these women reach the top show that society still favours men. Maybe not outwardly as just saying, "Oh, we're going to hire men over women," but certainly. Inadvertently, women are still subject to this kind of discrimination.
As for hiring discrimination, what little there is, it's mostly to do with the fact that women, on average, do tend to want children more than men. And that's not to say that men don't want children or women do want children as a whole, but women do, on average, tend to want children more, and that can mean lost profits for the company when a woman wants to have a child and they don't have any backup staff on hand. So that means that, say, if the woman was a secretary or an office worker, that means that somebody else has to do twice the work because that woman decided to start a family. And I'm not saying that starting a family is bad, it's just that it affects more people than just the woman starting the family. If one cog is missing out of a machine, then that can mean that the whole machine breaks down or stops working nearly as efficiently as it used to, and that can seriously impact so many people that it's best not to just hire a potential liability, and so a male candidate would be a safer option for hire than a female candidate. And that's not even saying that men or women are more capable of a job. It's just that men don't need to take paternity leave for every child. They can easily stay at work if they want to, and most of the time they do stay at work while their child is say a baby, because they don't have to, because they aren't the ones who have to nurture the child, and in fact children grow up just fine without it, because that's the position that children were in way back when society was just barely forming. With hunter-gatherers, the men would go out for hours a day while women would stay home and care for the children. That's just how it used to go, and that's how it goes now. And it does make more sense that women would be hired slightly more on average than men, because men are more reliable in how often they go to work, despite how many children they have. And in fact, they have more of an incentive to go to work when they have more children, as opposed to women, who typically stay home more if they have more children to take care of their children. And that is perfectly admirable. However, that would mean a loss of productivity for the company.
And for me personally, I don't think we can get rid of this until we get rid of capitalism, because whilst we have this system, we're not going to see a deconstruction of the hiring processes and boards that trust men more than women on average. But even without that, there's still equality issues that need to be brought up. And I know it's a common one to bring up, but the fact that a man like Donald Trump and the government formed of Republicans can exist and so openly attack and demean women's rights issues, so like women's health, hiring, discrimination laws, just general attitudes and the way they speak about women. That exists, and the fact that they're at the top of the US shows there's still problems to be reached. You only have to look the other week where Donald Trump is saying to his woman in the White House that you have to dress like a woman.
Communism won't affect how many women get pregnant. It'll just, I hate to say this, but it will just encourage, it will just encourage totalitarianism, because communism has never been proven to work. It does work in theory, but, however, as Napoleon once said, no battle plan has ever seen the enemy. And in this case, the enemy is people who are used to capitalism and have that taste of power in their mouth, and they don't want to leave it. So they end up taking up all the power for themselves. I'm not saying that capitalism is inherently bad. However, there has been no proven method for capitalism working, or no states that have capitalism that are currently working and not in the same state that communism. There are no currently proven communist states that are working better than North Korea is right now.
Which again, like, you wouldn't say that if you didn't have less of a view of women, and that shows that there's still things that need to be reached to achieve equality. So the next time you see someone debunking feminism and saying it's a load of rubbish and that equality's been achieved, just think about how men and women are seen in the world, and how there's still things that wouldn't happen to a man which happen to a woman. And then reconsider that feminism is rubbish.
Again, feminism isn't the great enemy. The great enemy is feminists who take it too far and try to strip others of their rights, as opposed to trying to give everyone rights.